was the father of 3 children, a husband of a wonderful wife, a man with a great future. On January 18th, 1989, I died. When I woke up, I was in heaven.
The man in the red Ford is deceased. I'd like to pray for him.
He's alive! You got him, Paul?
From what we've heard, Don's car was wrecked by an 18-wheeler.
Your husband is very badly injured. We are doing everything we can to save him.
I'm so scared. God, please help us.
I know it's going to be tough, but Don needs you now.
I fought all I can. I'm ready to die.
You got all these people who care so much for you, and you have no idea how much they love you.
We're gonna pray all night for you. We're taking over from here.
I have denied them the blessing of caring. You were right. Amidst all the suffering, I've learned that heaven is real. You prayed? I'm here.
Reminder of what happened 30 years ago in January. 30 years ago in January. I was thinking about what happened 1 year ago today. On the way here, I looked outside this morning as we were getting ready, and it was raining. And I was thinking, oh no, not again. We don't need another Harvey, and we're not going to get one now anyway. How are you today? Good? Great. Good to see you. I'm delighted to be here. Very honored. When I was asked to come several weeks ago by Pastor John, I was just honored to be here. And I want you to know that I'm praying for you during this time of transition. As a pastor of about 40 years, I have been on both sides of that fence, and I know how challenging it can be. But I can tell you, there are opportunities, there are chances, there are things that you can do. I think your best days are likely ahead, to be honest with you. It's not that you didn't ride on a good horse. We know that. But God can use these times to really propel you to a completely different level. And I'm praying for you, and I'm pulling for you. I'm in the bleachers with my shakers, and I'm cheering you on during this time, and I'm honored to be here during this time as well. I'm going to share a testimony today, and it's my story. And if you're a follower of Jesus, you have a story. Everybody has a story. I hope you don't have to get it run over by a truck to figure that out. Your story is just as important as mine, because your story may be the very one that somebody else needs to hear, whether it's at work or at school or on the street where you live or among your family members, among your friends. I think we're here to help everyone else get there. I noticed over the years that most people who come to know Christ don't immediately rapture and go to heaven. Have you noticed this? I think there's a reason for that. And I think the reason is we're here to help everyone else get there. And that's what you can be doing in the coming days and weeks, because this is a great church. I mean, just look around you. Look what God has done here over these years. And I just think that God can really use you now in a remarkable way, in a different way than He has perhaps used you up to this point. So take advantage of this. And if you're in the service today and you're not a member of a local church, let me encourage you to come back when I'm not here, because they do this every week about this time. And church is where you need to be. Everybody needs a church home. I mean, we couldn't have functioned without a church home. Well, you can clap for that. I mean, Eva, my wife, would have told you that there's no way we could have made it through this long, dark night without our church family embracing us and encouraging us. And so you need a church home if you live in the area, and let me recommend this one. This is a great church with a great history and I believe a great future. So come back again and consider becoming a part of the fellowship called Lazybrook. Glad to have you. Thank you for coming today. Delighted that you're here. This testimony really revolves around something that happened to me, as I said, 30 years ago. Hey, 2 weeks ago, I was at Trinity Pines doing a camp, leading a camp, and it was really always creepy going back there, to be perfectly honest with you. I'm walking across one of the paths up there. How many of you have ever been to Trinity Pines up on the North Shore? Okay, a lot of people. I was walking down one of the paths up there, and I'm thinking to myself, now this is just weird, but it's what happened. I was thinking to myself, this is the last time I ever walked on two normal legs, was down this pathway. This is the last time my arm worked the way this is the last time I was kind of like the person I was before I got run over by a truck. And then driving past the bridge where all this happened on the way back here, always an experience to look over there and see that bridge where my life changed forever. You know, there are bridges for all of us, aren't there? I mean, you're in one right now, and what you want to do is come out on the other end better because you're going somewhere. And on that bridge, I certainly came out different. And a lot of times we do, don't we? And that'll be a decision that you'll have to make, and you'll have to make it. It won't come naturally. I wrote some books about it, and here they are. We have some of them with us today. I generally often do book signings afterwards because some of you have brought some books with you. Be happy to sign them over here through those double doors in the fellowship area. And I have a real treat for you today. My wife is here. She is the hero of the story. I am not. And so she has her book as well called A Walk Through the Dark. If you know anybody going through a very difficult time and trying to help someone else get through a difficult time, this is a perfect book for that. That's why it's called A Walk Through the Dark. 90 Minutes in Heaven is the book that I wrote probably 15, 16 years ago. It's been out over 14 years. I wrote it so I wouldn't have to talk about it. That has not gone well at all. Here we are still talking about it 30 years later. I thought they'd be using it for skeet shooting by this time, but it just seems to have a life of its own. People want to know about heaven, and they want to know how to live on the way there. So that's what 90 Minutes in Heaven is about. There's a devotional book, 90 stories that I've collected over the years, one a day to start your day, or noontime, whenever you want to do it, with Bible verses and scriptures and prayers. Take you about 3 to 5 minutes on each one of them. People really like that book. It has some great stories in it. Heaven is Real. We have that book with us today. It's a book about getting over bridges. If you know somebody who is in pain, someone who's confused, somebody who's really struggling with how to live through another day, the subtitle in Heaven is Real is Lessons on Earthly Joy. If we know where we're going, shouldn't we be having a better trip on the way? And I meet a lot of Christians who don't seem to be having a good trip at all. So it's an encouraging book. I had to figure that out myself because I was never going to be the same. We do not have Getting to Heaven with us today. That's a book about how to live on the way with heaven. You can order it on a lot of the platforms. And then I have a new book coming out in November. I think we have a slide for that. I'm not sure. My daughter was supposed to put one in. No, there's a picture of the movie. Wow, we still haven't gotten used to having our life as a movie. It's really strange. I think you asked me if my kids knew that I was played in a movie by Darth Vader. And I said, absolutely. They call me Darth Preacher. And Kate Bosworth plays my wife, Eva. I just got a letter from her yesterday endorsing this new book, which I'm going to tell you about in a second. So Kate is doing great and has become very close friends. Some of you may or may not know that my daughter has stage 4 kidney cancer. Nicole, who you've seen in the movie, Nicole has one of her kidneys removed and is getting chemotherapy for the other one and is hanging in there at MD Anderson and going back and forth from Pasadena where we live. So your prayers for Nicole will be much appreciated. We do have some copies of the movie with us today. And then the next slide is probably the new book, I think, I hope. Maybe it's not. We'll see. Can we go to the next one? We can't? Okay. All right. This is it, right here. This is actually a mock-up of the book. This is not the real book. It's not out yet. November 18th, November 6th, I'm sorry. November the 6th, this book will be released nationwide, called People I Met at the Gates of Heaven, Who's Going to Be There Because of You? So it's an examination of many of those people I met at the gates of heaven. We'll talk about that in a second. In depth, and also what impact they had on my life, and then a lot of questions answered about heaven, and then the ultimate question, who's going to be there because of you? Right before Jesus was arrested and crucified, he was with his friends in the upper room. If you go to Jerusalem, the upper room is right above David's tomb. If you go to David's tomb, King David, the women go in a separate entrance from the men, and the men have to have their heads covered. It's very, very strict traditions about going into the tomb. And you go into the tomb, and there it is. Right above that is another room upstairs. Very few buildings in those days, obviously, were more than 2 stories. They might have had a kind of a ceiling above them. But it was probably just made of some plaster and some branches, so people could be cool in the evening. So right above that is what we now think is the upper room. And Jesus is with his followers. It's in that week, the last week, and he's about to be arrested. He knows that. He's about to be executed. He knows that. He's tried to prepare his followers, but they're not listening. It's kind of like being in church sometimes, You're here, but you're actually in the Bahamas, and your shell is here. So they're at the table, and they are listening because they're very afraid, and they had a reason to be afraid because there are threats against Jesus, which also means there are going to be threats against them. And so here they are in the room. They're gathered around the table. Their tables are very low. I love the Da Vinci painting where they're all looking out like they're a banquet or something. That didn't happen. They're all around this table. Their feet are out to the side. That's why you had to wash the feet. Nobody had done that. So Jesus just got through washing their feet because they failed to do so. And I love this. He chose them anyway, which is what he does, isn't it? Even when we fail, he chooses us anyway. So he chose them. They're sitting around the table. And he looks into their eyes, and he could see they're frightened, they're confused, they don't know what's going on. And as far as we know, all of them except one ended up being martyred, so they had a reason to be afraid. So he looks into their eyes, and that's when he shares those verses that we just heard John share earlier. Let not your hearts be troubled. Do you believe in God? Believe in me also. In my Father's house are many mansions. Now, notice those concrete words about heaven. Heaven is a more real place than this. This is a nice place, but one of these days this won't be here, neither will you. I guess you've noticed the death rate here on earth is 100%. You're not getting out of this alive. Unless Jesus returns while you're living, you are going to die someday. I'm not trying to be, maudlin. It's just the truth. And so he's trying to prepare them. You believe in God, believe in me also. My Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself. You want to know the best thing about heaven? You can tell everybody when you leave. You're with God. That's the best thing about heaven. Oh, you can talk about angels all day long. You can talk about reunions and golden boulevards and all that stuff is there. But you're with God. Read Revelation 21 and you'll find out the first 6 verses, we hear these words. We will be with God and God will be with us and we will be with Him over and over again because that's the best thing about heaven. You're with God. So He's telling them this. And hopefully they're listening. Somebody was listening because they wrote it down. We're still talking about it. I will come again and receive you unto myself. That where I am, you will be also. And then he says this, you know where I'm going, and you know how to get there. If you read the Synoptic Gospels, if you read Acts, you'll find out he told them repeatedly something like this was going to happen, but they don't want it to happen. Hey, if your best friend was telling you, I'm going to leave you, I'm about to be arrested and executed, you do everything you could to keep that from happening because you love them. So they just didn't get it. I don't know how they could have got it, really, but he's telling them this. Well, Thomas, I love Thomas. Thomas is so us. Thomas stands up on the dinner table and says, we don't know where you're going, and we don't know how to get there. Aren't those good questions? I think they are. I mean, you never asked the question, is heaven a real place? And if it is, how do I get there? That's when Jesus said those words. If you want to know how to get to heaven, I am the way. I am the truth. I'm the life. No man comes to the Father except through me. So if you're counting on some other way to get you to heaven, it's not going to work. You know, we'll have an altar call here at the end of this service, and there's several aisles, and that's great because those are the ways you get down here. There are not several aisles to heaven. There's one way to heaven. Jesus is the way. I found out the hard way that's true. I got run over by a truck on the way to church. Trinity Pines, I was just here a couple of weeks ago. I pulled out of the gate that morning, January 18th, 1989, headed back to my church in Alvin. And that was a pretty good hike. It was raining. It was cold. It was a miserable day, but I didn't care. I was on my way to church. I was always happy about that. I had a stack of sermons on the seat beside me. I was getting ready to start a new sermon series the following Sunday morning on This We Believe. The top sermon was, I believe in a great God. The sermon under that was, I believe in Jesus, the Son of God. The sermon under that was, I believe in the Holy Spirit. I believe in the shared meal of the new covenant. I believe in baptism. You could see where these sermons were going. I never preached any of those sermons in my church. I actually only have a copy of one of the sermons, and the only reason I have that is because a state policeman found the pages of it flying all over the bridge, picked it up, put it together, and gave it to my family as a keepsake because I was a fatality. I still have that sermon in my office at my home. It's called I Believe in a Great God. It is covered in my dried blood. So I turn to the right. If you turn to the right, you have to cross Lake Livingston. In those days, it was a much more wide open lake than it is now, very little vegetation in it. And so I'm driving across the lake. At the end of it, I can see an old bridge. I did not know at the time, but that old bridge is the Trinity River Bridge, which of course was dammed up to make the lake. And so I just thought the bridge looked wildly out of place in a lake. Well, it was the riverbed under that bridge. So I'm driving onto it. It's very old. It is still there, not in use anymore, been replaced by a nice 4-lane bridge. And the reason it's still there, you may or may not know, is because it's a memorial bridge built to honor originally the veterans of World War I when it was just called the Great War. And now it honors all veterans, as we should honor all veterans. So I'm driving onto it. You can see it's very narrow. As I said, it's raining, a miserable day. Visibility is not good. At the end of the bridge, there's a steep embankment that goes up. It's coming down from Riverside. It was a much steeper embankment that is now presently there. There was a boat launch at the end of the bridge. There's now a boat launch at the end of the other bridge. And so I'm going onto the bridge, and I'm about to exit the bridge. Coming over the hill down onto the bridge at a rapid rate of speed is an 18-wheeler driven by a prison inmate from one of the prisons in Huntsville. He was a volunteer. The regular driver didn't show up that day. He hasn't driven a truck in many years, if he had ever driven a truck, and he's driving fast. He said a car pulled out at the end of the bridge. He knew he was going to hit that car, and so to avoid hitting that car, he swerved around it into my lane and hit me head on. The 9 wheels on the driver's side of the truck ran over my car, flattened it, and shoved it up against the railing of the bridge. He went off the back, struck 2 cars in his lane, and then finally brought the rig to a halt at the end of the bridge. Four-vehicle collision on the old Trinity River Bridge, a hideous wreck, really. And so police and ambulances were called from all jurisdictions out to that bridge. Actually, under that bridge is a county line. And so they had to come from different places to work this accident. I was killed instantly. The other 3 people, amazingly, were not hurt at all. They were all treated and released. And so 4 paramedics that were sent to the bridge to work on the 4 victims are now working on me because it's obvious I am not okay. They're doing everything they can to try to revive me, try to resuscitate me. They're unsuccessful. In spite of their best efforts, I am pronounced dead on the scene. This old grainy photograph is from the Huntsville newspaper. The following morning, I'm actually in the wreckage of that car on the left-hand side of the picture. You can see the right-hand side of the car, or the left-hand side, if you're facing this way, is missing. I am under a tarp inside the car. Obviously, all the windows are gone. And they're waiting for a coroner, a medical examiner, to come to the bridge to investigate, pronounce the body dead, and transport me. There's another vehicle standing by to take away the body. It's not an ambulance. One ambulance remains. So it's now a standstill on the bridge. Nobody can move. There's an investigation going on because there's a fatality, and everything's stopped. Now, back behind me are dozens of other preachers who have been to that same conference at Trinity Pines. They're all trying to get to their churches, and they're not going anywhere now. One of those preachers, a guy named Dick Onerecker. Dick Onerecker was a pastor of First Baptist Church Klein First Baptist Church, which is where the old Goodyear blimp base used to be. It was my privilege years later to speak for him at that church, and we became good friends. I did not know him then. I heard him speak at the conference, but I didn't meet him and his wife, Anita. They came up on the accident, and they saw how horrible it was. Dick Onerecker started walking up to the collision itself, and God spoke to him, which I think God is doing. I think God's doing a lot more speaking than we are listening. But God was speaking that day, and Dick Onerecker was listening when God said this: "Pray for the man in the red car." That made no sense to him at all. Never had he thought about praying for dead people. It just wasn't part of his theology, mine either. In fact, I wouldn't believe most of this story if it hadn't happened to me. And so he says to the policeman, "I have to pray for the man in the red car." And the policeman said, "Well, that won't do any good. He's dead. All these medical people, they've done everything they could to revive him. He's dead." "Well, that may be, but God's told me to pray for him, so I have to pray for him." "Go right ahead." No, I want to put my hand on him and pray for him. I want to hold him and pray for him." "Oh, no, you can't do that. You get hurt. It's twisted metal, broken glass. You can't do that." "No, I have to pray for him." So they got in a little discussion. Boy, a preacher and a policeman. There's a discussion. And so the preacher prevailed in this case. He got in from the back. It was a hatchback car, as you'll see in a minute. The hatchback has been knocked off. So he crawled in from the back. I've been covered with a tarp so nobody would have to look at me because it was hideous. And it's raining. Remember, the windows are all gone. So they're trying to preserve the scene. And so he crawls in, pulls up the tarp, a little light comes in, and he could see that the only thing I didn't break in the accident was my right arm. This is the only thing I did not break in the accident, this arm. So he puts his hand on my right shoulder from the rear, and he begins to pray for me under the tarp in the dark because God told him to. He's not the only one praying for me at that point, because they had searched me early to try to know who I was. And when they searched me, found my wallet. They knew I lived in Friendswood in those days, right beside Alvin, and my wife's teacher. So they called home. Nobody was at home. My wife was teaching, and the children were at school. So then they found my business card in the wallet, South Park Baptist Church, Alvin, Texas. They called the church, and they told them I'd been in a terrible accident, but not that I was dead, because next of kin has not been notified yet. So they're waiting to find out where my family is so they can tell them, send somebody there, and so it's at a standstill. So they did tell the church I'd been in a really bad accident. The church launches immediately into a prayer meeting, and they start calling every church in the Houston phone book. That's a lot of churches. The Baptist General Convention of Texas in those days sent out a fax to all churches in the state of Texas about this preacher that was in a car wreck. And they didn't know I was dead. So suddenly, thousands and thousands of people are praying for me, most of whom I've never met, although in these past 30 years, I've met hundreds of people in person who prayed for me that day on the bridge. Just a couple of years ago, I was in Modesto, California speaking, and a man came up to me just bawling. He was barely coherent. And finally, here's what I got out of him. "I prayed for you that day in Taipei, Taiwan." Well, that would have been the middle of the night over there. But somebody woke him up and he started praying for me. So all these people are praying for me. They're lifting up their petitions to the throne of God on my behalf, most of whom don't know me. One man's in the car praying over my dead body. I don't care. I'm at the gates of heaven. I'm having the best time. If I'd have known they were praying, I would have told them to stop. But they were being obedient. They were praying for me. This went on for an hour and a half. How do we know that? The accident happened at 11:45 a.m. on the bridge. It is now 1:15 in the afternoon on the bridge. county official, well, there was a justice of the peace. The coroner has not arrived on the scene. Everything's at a standstill. Dick on a record's under the tarp praying over my dead body, and he's singing an old hymn. Incidentally, you guys sing really good. I love the singing, which is very powerful today. You're going to like heaven because there's great singing up there. So he's now singing prayers. He's singing an old prayer called "What a Friend We Have in Jesus." This is a great old hymn. I was watching a video the other night of Billy Graham, and I learned something. I thought I knew a lot about Billy Graham, but I did not know, besides the fact that he loves Vienna sausage, that his favorite hymn is "What a Friend We Have in Jesus." I saw him say it right there on the video. Well, it was one of mine, too, and Dick Otterecker singing that hymn, holding onto my right shoulder under the tarp in the dark. I've been dead an hour and a half, and as he sings that song under the tarp in the dark, suddenly, without any warning, I start singing the song with him. And he got out of the car really fast, which I think anybody would have. But you might not have done this. He went over to the policeman and essentially said, "Officer, the dead man is singing." And nobody believed that because it's preposterous, really. It's impossible. But it was true. I remember singing with him under the tarp in the dark, even if I didn't know who he was and I didn't know why we were singing, and I certainly didn't know what had happened to me. I was in complete shock. So he had to convince them to come and check on me because they're packed up. That one ambulance is packed up. They're leaving. Like I said, they had another vehicle taking away the dead body. So he's flustered now because they've done everything they can for me. They're leaving. They have other work to do. So he gets so frustrated that he walks around and stands in front of the ambulance and says this: "If you leave here without him in the back of that ambulance, I'm going to lie down here on this bridge, and you're going to have to run over me because I'm not moving until you check on him." Well, they did, and found out that, as we say in Texas, sure enough, I was alive. Not very alive, but alive. So then they had to get me out of there. You could see this picture was taken a little bit later because the jaws of life are right there laying in front of the car, and that was not on the scene. They didn't need it to remove a dead person. So they had to get this from Huntsville, 30 miles away. So you could see how this is piling up on itself. And so eventually they did extract me from that car, and they put me in the gurney, took me to a series of hospitals. Let's look at the car next, I think. Yeah. That's the actual car at the wrecking yard. You could see the trajectory of the truck. The roof has been peeled back and then put back at the wrecking yard. But you can see how he crawled into the trunk of the car. Well, the back of the car, because it's hatchback. This next one shows an actual profile of the car, so you could see the steering wheel. There's no airbags in those days, so I have been impaled on the steering wheel. I have, and you can see where they cut the stanchions to peel the roof back to try to get me out as close to one piece as possible. I had brain damage as a result of the accident. My wife still thinks I have brain damage, and no, this works out well, really, if you stop and think about it. I did have brain damage. I had internal injuries because of the steering wheel into my chest, so I had life-threatening internal injuries. The dashboard collapsed on both of my legs because of the weight of the truck coming up over the front of the car. So my right leg was broken at the knee. It did not go this direction. It went the other direction. And it hit right above my left knee about an inch. And when it hit right above my left knee and the weight of that truck came down, my left leg was severed, and 4.5 inches of femur, the largest bone in the human body, was ejected from that car and never found. So that part of my leg is just lying close to the floor. I am in pieces. So I'm in an ambulance now, and they're trying to find help for me. They took me to a series of hospitals. One was in Trinity. There's nothing they could do for me there. You could go ahead and show those pictures. Let's look at this one next. This is actually a film grab. That's the gentleman who played Dick Otterecker. He's crying. I got news for you. We had lunch before this was filmed. He was already crying before we got to the scene where this was filmed, because we were using a real bridge, obviously. So, and there he is walking forward. If you wonder what that's, the policeman. He's actually looking down at a page of the sermon, "I Believe in a Great God," that's on the bridge. So Dick prayed, and I'm here. The hospitals, started in Trinity. They couldn't do anything for me there. They took me to Huntsville Memorial Hospital. They stabilized me, and they're going to life flight me to a level 1 trauma center, which was Herman. In those days, but the weather's too bad for helicopters to take off and land, so I can't be transported that way. I could have got here in a matter of minutes. So now I'm in an ambulance in a driving rainstorm going down the Gulf Freeway late in the afternoon. So I had the accident at 11:45. I arrived at the emergency room in Herman Hospital at 6:15, 6.5 hours after the wreck. And from that moment on, I would be in a hospital bed for 13 months and have 34 major operations to put me back together again. So what does this all mean? A couple things. First, I believe God answers prayer. I'm here because a lot of people prayed and God said yes. It had nothing to do with my survival. Had I had a choice, I'd have stayed there and I'd come back here. You're lovely people, but I'd rather be there. And I hope you're coming. Incidentally, if you're not coming, we're taking reservations this morning. And that's the main reason I'm here. We're trying to get people into heaven. So I hope you don't walk out one of these doors without being ready for heaven. I got killed on the way to church. What does that say? So there I am in the hospital. People have prayed for me before. Now they're praying for me big time because I'm not expected to live. I was in the ICU for 2.5 weeks, 2 weeks, and then finally transferred out. I developed double pneumonia within, 2 or 3 days. If you're in traction on 3 or 4 limbs and you're flat on your back and you have pneumonia, you are not going to make it because you can't breathe. Your lungs are so congested. So they have to try to find a way to stabilize my limbs so that I can be set up to give breathing treatments. So that was quite something. What's our next slide? In that same chapter, John 14, where Jesus says, you may ask, where he says, I am the way, the truth, and life. He also says this, you may ask me for anything in my name, and I will do it. I mean, let that soak in for a second. And let me ask you this question. Have you not asked for things from God and you didn't get it? What's going on there? Haven't you ever asked that question? Why, God, I asked for this, and why didn't I get it? Why? Well, sometimes the answer to our prayers is no. I mean, I've lived long enough that I'm glad God answered a lot of my prayers no. If I got what I asked for, it would have been a disaster. Sometimes the best thing to pray for is to know what to pray for and pray for that. But the qualifier in this sentence is, you may ask me for anything in my name. And what that means is it qualifies for the will of God. It is in the center of God's will. If it's His will and you ask for it, you're getting it. That's what it says. People were asking that I would live. They were asking in spite of all the things we're told. I would never walk again. I would never use this arm again. I would never function mentally again. They're praying for it, and God said yes. So we can conclude it was in the center of God's will. We have not because we ask not. Let me ask you a direct question. What do you think would happen around this part of Houston if you decided to pray for people who are not ready to go to heaven with the kind of passion Dick Honorrecker did over my dead body in a car? I'll tell you what would happen. You don't have enough pews. This church would go crazy praying like that. Why not? Why not now? Why not here? If you want to see that kind of thing happen, it's going to start with prayer. I believe in prayer. I am an answered prayer. I was talking to a gentleman before the service started, a World War II veteran. My dad was a World War II veteran. My dad also fought in Korea and Vietnam, all three. He was a highly decorated soldier, and he deserved to be. My father would come and see me in the room. Let's go to the next slide. Some of these are going to be pretty graphic. The way they decided to save my life was to install some devices, in case of the femur device, that had never been installed in this country before. They were imported from the Soviet Union, the technology. These are bone stretching devices. It meant that they had to break my leg in another place, then put stainless steel halos around it, 4 of them, and screws, and they would turn those screws 4 times a day to try to stretch the bone that was remaining to close the gap where the bone was missing. That is one half of the one that was on my leg. If you could go back to the previous slide, you could see what they did to my arm. It's a stationary device that meant rods went through my arm and came out the other side. There was a bar of steel above it and a bar of steel below it that held my arm in a stationary place. There are no bones that you can transplant into a femur, except another femur. That's not going to help you. So there just isn't anything. So this is what they use, the bone stretching device. I wore that thing for a year. The one on the arm I wore about 8 or 9 months. The bones in this arm actually came from my right pelvis. They harvested bones out of my hip, and they put them in this arm to replace the ones that were missing. The skin off of this arm came from my right leg. Medical people have a wonderful knack for finding things you didn't even hurt and hurt that for you to fix the other stuff. So that's the way it was. That was me. Now, I've also broken the other leg. It's in a cast. So it's just, my dad's there. My dad, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, he's seen everything. My mother came in the room once, and then she never came in again. She passed out when she saw this. It just took her breath away, and we found her on the floor. So they came and got her. From then on, until this was all removed, my mother would stand at the door and talk around the hospital door, and I would talk back to her. My dad, he was one tough dude. He would come in to see me. He would sit down at the foot of the bed, and it was a small room, and he would sit there and he would talk about cars and football and stuff like we always did. But then he would get around to talking about me. And then one day he got up from his chair and walked around to the other side. Some of you might just be able to see my right hand up in the corner up there. So he walked around that side of the bed. My father was very arthritic. He took my hand and his just gnarled hand. My father, the old drill sergeant, leaned down and said this into my ear. Son, I would give anything to trade places with you. It's my dad. He meant that. I'm a father and a grandfather. I understand completely. I got better. But of course, he got worse. As time went by, I found myself going 250 miles the other direction to where they lived. And I would sit beside his bed, and I would hold his hands, and I would tell him, now weighing under 100 pounds in a fetal position, I would tell my father how much I loved him. I would go outside. My mother would follow me outside. My mother and father were married for 61 years. She never left his side. Sometimes he left her to go to Korea or wherever he was stationed, that she could not go or we could not go. But she never left him. She walked outside. She took my hands. She looked up at me, and this is what my mother said to me. Son, you know, the doctors try to make your dad comfortable. They try to give him things that will make him feel better. But you know, having been with him all these years, nothing makes him feel better than when one of his children comes to talk to him. When's the last time you talked to God the Father? He wants to hear from his children. That's why we're here, for fellowship with God. I'm not just talking about the grocery list of stuff you need. I'm talking about having fellowship with God. It's prayer. Prayer moves the hand of God. I'm here because a lot of people prayed. God said yes. I believe in miracles. Obviously, a lot of miracles had to happen for me to walk into this place today and walk out of here when I'm finished. Having been told I would never walk, having had double pneumonia, having been run over by an 18-wheeler, I could chronicle miracles until the cows came home tonight. We won't do that. But I believe in miracles. Listen to this verse of Scripture that's also in John chapter 14. I tell you the truth, anyone who has faith in me will do what I have been doing. Now get this. He will do even greater things than these because I am going to the Father. Notice these verses. The first one, it says you can ask for anything. What does it say there in the first sentence? Anyone. I think that includes us in this room today. Has faith in me. Anyone who has faith in me will do what I've been doing. And you know what Jesus did. He will do even greater things than these. He's talking to a bunch of guys in this particular case that saw him change water into wine. They saw him make the blind see. They saw him make the lame walk. They were standing outside the tomb when Jesus said, Lazarus, come forth. Lazarus came waltzing out of the tomb. They saw this with their eyes. And now he's telling them that you're going to do greater things than this after I'm gone. Why should we be surprised that some of the greatest things that have ever happened have happened since this? I had a lady come up with a copy of this book recently at a church, and she's holding it like this. She leans over and says directly to my face, really kind of uncomfortably close to my face, she said, you sent me this book in jail. I said, well, ma'am, we send a lot of books to jail. It's the only way they can get them. Nobody can take a thing to jail and leave it there, but you can mail it to them so they can look at it and give it to them. So we mail them out all the time. She said, you sent it to me. I was in jail for my 6th DUI. I'm an alcoholic. I was out of options. I didn't have any good time. I didn't have any probation. I had nothing. I'm in my 60s, she said. They sent me to jail. I'd never been there, and I was in there, and I thought I was going to die. And finally, I started communicating with some of the other ladies that were in jail, and I said, how in the world do you get through this? And she said, well, I'll tell you how I got through it. I read a book called 90 Minutes in Heaven by this guy who was never going to be the way he was before. He needed a miracle, and you need one too. Maybe he'll send it to you. She ordered it from me. She got online. We sent it to her, and she said, I read the book, and it just changed my life. And I'm here today, Pastor Piper, to ask you to pray for me, because 3 weeks from today in this church where we're standing, the church where we were, she said, I'm going to start leading a session of Celebrate Recovery for alcoholics and addicts. Well, you can clap for that. See, I think that's a miracle. Maybe you need a miracle. I've got good news. God is still in the miracle business. Greater things than these. Well, I wasn't going to be the same after this, as you clearly know. I looked like I fell in a hay baler from the neck down, and there were 3 years of therapy and rehabilitation after all this stuff to learn how to walk again, to learn how to use this arm that was in the back seat of the car. So a lot of things had to happen. I had to find a new normal. I was never going to be the way I was before. So let me encourage you today, because I want to talk about heaven right now. If you're here and you've been knocked down, you don't have to be knocked out. That's the way I lived my life for, over a year. And then a couple more years of rehab. You can see where they started taking the skin off my right leg. You can see where the right leg was broken at the knee. That's room 2115 in St. Luke's Medical Tower. I own that room, or I should. Paid for it several times over. I'm laying in the bed at 3 a.m. Everybody's tried to be nice to me. It didn't work. I'm not happy. And so one morning at 3 a.m., when I never slept, I just passed out. Every day I just passed out. I was shaking my hand at God, and here's what I said to him at 3 a.m. in the morning, listening to some music beside the bed on a cassette machine that's just right out of sight. You can read the book, find out what the songs were, because they were profound. I said, God, why can't you send somebody here who understands what this is like? If I could just find somebody, if I could talk to somebody who's been through this, then I could kind of know how it turns out. And never how it turns out is okay with me. I just want to know how to get through this. Could you send someone here, please? And God speaks to me. One of those times where I heard the voice of God through the music, and here's what he said. This is not about you, son. This is about me. And what I can do through you now, I can never do before the truck hits you. You need to get over your pity party, and you need to stop shaking your fist at me, and you need to take the very same hand, and you need to start reaching out to other people. Instead of asking for some help, instead of asking for somebody here who understands, you need to be the person who understands. You need to hold people's hand and say, I know what this is like. I'm going to help you get through to the other side. This is your new normal. And it was. It was the first day of the rest of my life. I'm not normally a very outwardly emotional person. I am now, but wasn't then. I started weeping there on the 21st floor. The blinds are up. I could see MD Anderson across the street. And I just started weeping when the sun came up. It was the first day of the rest of my life. Maybe you need a new normal. So you can shake your fist at God. It won't bother him a bit. He's God. He'd rather you shake your fist at him than ignore him. But look at this. Bitter. Better. Let me help you. I understand how you feel. Together, we can get through this. Well, that's a word for some of you. And you know who you are. You're a time of transition in your church. together, you can get through this. To a better thing. It may not be the way it was before. It could be better. Or it can be bitter. Why? Why? Hey, before you put your head on the pillow tonight, remember this. I think you'll know what to do. Hey, I've been beaten up, but I'm not beaten. I got the scars to show for it. You need to turn your test into a testimony. Take your mess and make a message. It's going to bless somebody else. Take your pain and find a purpose. You'll know why. When the truck struck me, I was standing at the gates of heaven. I didn't go down a long tunnel. There wasn't bright light at the end of the tunnel. I was just like that. I'm instantly at the gates of heaven. I was killed instantly. That's the way it worked for me. I'm standing there. If you read Revelation 21, you're going to find out there's 12 gates in heaven. 12. 3 on each side of the great city. And I'm at one of those gates, and it's magnificent. It looks like the inside of an oyster. It's a gate made of pearl. It's dazzling. It's like a living thing. I thought it was alive, but it was the light reflecting off the gate. You could not see heaven with your earthly eyes, and you won't have any earthly eyes in heaven. It was brilliant, and it was reflecting off of that gate, but it's also coming from the entrance. And I'll talk about that in a second. But I'm surrounded by this light reflecting off this gate. I'm panning down, and I'm looking at people I had known and loved in life who were there to meet me at the gates. First person I saw was my grandfather. My grandfather was a carpenter. I told you about my dad. This is my mother's dad. He was a carpenter. He could not read. He could not write, but he could take lumber and nails and do this. I saw him do it hundreds of times. I followed him around like a puppy when I was a little boy because Dad was always off fighting somewhere. I would hand my grandfather nails, and he would nail them even if they were the wrong nail, and he would look down at me and say, "Son, you're a big help to Papa." I believed him. And I got to tell you something. I really loved him. I loved him. One night he died. I rode with him in the ambulance to the hospital after he had the heart attack. I was standing outside the door when the doctor came out and said, "I'm sorry." Personal friend. The doctor was a personal friend of my grandfather's. He said, "I'm sorry. I did everything I could, but I lost him." I got a lot of broken bones, but nothing hurts like a broken heart. When Papa died, it broke my heart. Last time I saw him, he was in a casket at church. He did not look good. Now I'm standing at the gates of heaven, and he's standing right in front of me. And he looked really good. If you want to look really good, heaven is where you want to be. You look nice today, but let's face it, if you've been around a while, you got a lot of scars on you on the inside and the outside. Maybe stuff that used to hang on to you has fallen off. I had a guy interrupt a service in Baton Rouge, like 4,000 people. I was talking about how perfect we'll be in heaven, just the way God wanted us to be when He made us in the first place, before age and circumstances on earth has taken its toll on us. And this guy stands up and he goes, "I want to know about hair." I looked back there. I said, "Yeah, sir?" Of course, everybody looked back there. He said, "I want to know about hair." I said, "Well, I haven't really thought about it. As far as I know, everybody I saw in heaven had hair." And he said, "Praise God." And then he sat down. That's all he wanted to know. I don't know what your priorities are, but you're going to look good in heaven. You are. My grandfather was missing fingers on both of his hands. He was a lumberjack during the Depression, $1 a day. He rode a freight train out to cut these big trees down and back in the evening. My grandfather had one shirt and one pair of socks. My grandmother washed them every night, hung them by the potbelly stove. He would put them on and go back to work every day. The men at lunch noticed when he took his shoes off that he had the same holes on the same socks in the same places. They made fun of him. They called him Joe Socks. That name stuck with him the rest of his life. So when Joe Socks died, now I'm standing at the gates of heaven, and I look out and I see the hands that used to hold me when I was a little boy. There was missing 3 fingers on one hand and 2 on the other, and his fingers were there. I'd never seen them before. He was perfect. My great-grandmother was standing right beside him. She had osteoporosis, and she walked like this. She couldn't stand up straight. She wasn't missing fingers. She was missing teeth. She had no teeth. She had some teeth she referred to as store-bought teeth. She did not like them. She did not wear them often. In fact, the only time I really ever saw her wear her teeth for sure was to church on Sunday mornings. When she would get home from church, her husband was a deacon, my great-grandfather. When she got home from church, she said she would take her teeth out and put them in a glass of water beside the sink in the kitchen. Perhaps some of you have seen this. When we were little boys and we didn't have anything to do, sometimes we'd just sneak in the kitchen and stare at Grandma's teeth. And they were always smiling back at us. When I saw my great-grandmother at the gates of heaven, Grandma Hattie, she was a good 6 inches taller there than she was here. I'm almost looking at her like this instead of down like this. And she smiled at me. And I promise you, it was the most beautiful smile I have ever seen in my existence. She was perfect. We shall all be perfect in heaven. There's only one person in heaven with scars, Jesus Christ, to remind the rest of us of how we got there. You know, Adrian Rogers used to say, there's only one man-made thing in heaven, the scars of Jesus. But you're not going to have any on you, inside or out. They all look great. A friend from high school was killed in a car crash at 18. I talk about these people extensively in the new book, People I Met at the Gates. Suffice it to say, you are not going to sneak up on heaven. Everybody up there knows who's coming. Let me say this directly. They don't miss you. They expect you. Remember, there's no time in heaven. It's eternal. It's linear. It's propelled forward, but there's no elapse of time. We're not looking at a clock wondering how quickly we can get to the cafeteria. That would never happen in heaven because there is no time. There is no night. It's eternal. So the people that are there will just pivot and you'll be right behind them in a heavenly sense. Not for them, and maybe decades that we're missing them. So people often ask me, did they miss me? No, they don't miss you. They expect you. Because everybody who is going to heaven has their name written down in heaven. When you come to Christ, they record your name in a book up there called the Lamb's Book of Life. Go home and read Revelation 21 tonight. You'll read all about this book. It's in another place in Scripture too. But there's this Lamb's Book of Life. You want your name in this book. It's inscribed. You go to a hotel, and one of the first things they ask you when you walk in there, do you have a reservation? You're going to need one in heaven, too. And as I said earlier, we're taking them this morning. Reservation. So they were expecting me. I wasn't planning to die that day, but thank God I was ready when I did. I mean, the people who met me, one had been 18 when he died, another one was 81 when she died, but in heaven there is no age. Both of them were prepared for heaven. Heaven is a prepared place for prepared people. Jesus said, I go to prepare a place for you. You are going to have to be prepared for the place. You're not going because you're good. You're not going because you're a member of Lazybrook. You're not going because your mother was a Methodist or a Presbyterian or a Baptist. You're going to heaven if you have an authentic, personal relationship with Jesus Christ. That's the way. That's what he meant when he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So if you're here today and you're sitting in the pew and you're thinking to yourself, have I ever done that? Oh, you need to answer that question. And the answer is, no, I'm not sure. We could take care of that right now. Let's give the angels something to sing about. Well, I'm going forward past these people. They look great, and I can see through the gate. It's quite small. The entrance is small, just big enough for one person because we go in one at a time. It's a personal thing. And there's a boulevard of gold running down the center of the city. It shouldn't surprise us any. There is a golden street. On both sides, trees, fruit. The tree of life is there. We can eat freely of it. There's no knowledge of good and evil anymore in heaven. It's only good. And so we'll be able to eat these. I didn't eat anything while I was there, but I know it would have been good if I did. Here's the good news. In heaven, we don't eat for sustenance. We eat for fellowship. Baptist Church has been way ahead of the curve on this for years. Because we'll eat for fellowship at the drop of a hat. Well, in heaven, that's what we eat for, to be together as God's children at His table. Doesn't that sound good? So all these trees are there. There are mansions there, rooms. Everybody gets one. I don't know how much time you want to spend in yours. I think I'd rather go down the Golden Street, talk to Moses and Mary. Maybe, just maybe, they may want to talk to me. I don't know. But we'll have plenty of time to figure it out. I could see a pinnacle in the center of the city, high and lifted up. And the brightest light of all was coming from that hill. There were thrones up there, and I knew that's where the Lord was. This is His city, high and lifted up. I wanted to go past the people who greeted me. I wanted to go through the very thick wall that surrounds heaven. I wanted to go down the street of gold. I wanted to climb that hill and fall at the feet of the great God of all creation and say, thank you. Thank you for letting me come. Thank you. But I never got a chance. I did pass the people. I began to move through layers of angels. Angels are everywhere in heaven. There are untold numbers of them. Some have 6 wings, some have 2, some have none, and they were hovering around me. One was in the car with me holding onto this hand. I didn't know it until sometime later. I thought it was Dick Honorecker. He never held my hand. He put his hand on my shoulder, but I did hold the hand in the car. We're entertaining them without knowing here, but they're everywhere up there, and I can not only hear their voices, I can hear their wings. What a glorious sound it was. What a comforting sound it was to hear the wings of angels. And then I began to move through the music. Yes, there are colors there we can't see here. Heaven is a sensory explosion of all the senses. But the music just transported me. There were thousands of songs at the same time without chaos. They all were symbiotic. They all fit together. They all praised God. For He alone is worthy of our worship. And they're all worshiping God. Thousands of songs. Only one song distinguished itself from all the thousands of other songs. Holy, holy, holy. Holy, holy, holy. Because He is holy. And this is His place. So how did I get there? Because I'm not holy. I've got witnesses. Ask my kids. Ask my wife. How did I get there? I mean, don't you have to be holy to be in heaven? Absolutely. I'll tell you how I got there. It was on a Sunday morning like this. I was 16 years old. I'd started going to church on my own because my family didn't go in those days. I borrowed my mother's car keys. Some kids invited me to church. How about that? Kids invited me to church. So I went. And I knew I would see them when I got there. That's one thing that kind of pulled me in. And so I began to study the Bible. I began to listen to the Bible study. I began to listen to the sermons in the church. And I knew I wasn't ready to go to heaven. So one Sunday morning, the pastor said, "Who wants to go to heaven? We're taking reservations today." I knew he was talking about me. I was sitting on the 3rd row right down here. And they stood up to sing like we're going to momentarily. And I knew I had to go down there. I was like in a 3-point stance. I was ready to go. I didn't wait for them to do 8 verses. I mean, I was down there. I took the pastor's hand and I said, "I want to go to heaven." And he said, "Son, this is the best decision you'll ever make." He was right. 2 weeks later, I was up in the baptistry, and I'm telling you, that was glorious too. If you haven't been baptized and you're a follower of Jesus, you need to do that. It's the obedient thing to do. And so, I didn't know that 22 years later on a lonely highway in East Texas, I was going to get run over by an 18-wheeler. Thank God I was ready. I wasn't planning to die that day. Who is? So maybe you're 16 or 12 or you're 81. I had a lady come down an aisle in a wheelchair in Hawaii. She was 95. It's the first time she'd ever been in a Christian church in her life. She gave her life to Jesus. If a 95-year-old woman in a wheelchair can come down, you can. Or maybe you just need to come and pray for somebody who's not ready to go to heaven. A neighbor, your wife, husband, brother, sister, somebody you work with, somebody at school that you care about. You love them in geometry class. Don't you want to see them in heaven one day? Who's going to be there because of you? I think that's why we're still here. I'm going through the gates, and I'm surrounded by the music and the sound, and it was just glorious. There are no words for it. Why did I wait so long to talk about it? There are no words to do it justice. I'm going in now, and I'm home. That's home. This is not home. And I'm entering inside, and it all stopped in an instant. Suddenly I found myself in silence and darkness. And only one sound is penetrating the darkness, and this sound is behind me, not in front of me. It's that preacher singing that song in that car. What a friend we have in Jesus. And I was back here. I didn't know what had happened to me. It would be hours before I fully understood what had happened to me. But then it would be weeks and months and years before I really understood it because I lay in a bed like this and I asked the same question you would have asked if you'd have been in the same situation. God, why did you let me see that and take it away from me? Why did you bring me back to this? Why? Here's the answer. So I could be at Lazybrook Baptist Church today and tell you to your face, heaven is real. And Jesus is the way. And we're taking reservations right now. So I want to pray for your church. We're going to have a time of invitation. There'll be some singing, some music. You can join in that. If you want to come and pray for a lost loved one, you can do it where you're at. Sometimes it just really kind of seals the deal if you really come and kneel at the altar. I know it may not be easy. I don't kneel very well myself with these legs. Whatever God tells you to do, hey, do this. Be obedient. Because if Dick Honoraker hadn't been obedient, I wouldn't be standing here talking to you. That's all it took, obedience. Listening to God and responding. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for this church and its ministry in this community and around the world. God bless Lazybrook Baptist Church. Everybody who serves here, the staff, the lay leaders, the membership, Lord, just bless them. I'm praying for better days, even better days ahead. God bless them. Guide them. Lord, I'm praying for every individual in the room right now. We have some young people. We have some people who've been around for quite a while. But the truth is, age doesn't matter in heaven. It's whether you're ready or not. So I'm praying, Lord, that in our heart of hearts right now, with heads bowed and eyes closed, we will ask ourselves this question. If something were to happen to me on the way home from church today, I were to be in a tragic accident and lose my life, would I be in heaven? Will I take my last breath here on earth and my next breath at the gates of heaven? Am I ready? If you can't say for sure that you're ready, you need to get ready. Because it can happen any minute. A hurricane could come. Nowadays, it could be a drive-by shooting. You could be in the wrong place, the wrong time. You got to be ready. So I'm praying, Lord, that we'll all be ready. Heads bowed and eyes closed, I'm praying that we'll just incline our hearts towards you and say in our own words, God, I'm a sinner. I need salvation. I know I've not done what I needed to do, and I know I have done some things I shouldn't have done. I am sorry. Please forgive me. But Lord, I'm asking that you come into my heart and help me live better from now on. I'm not just sorry, I want to change. And starting now, I want to serve you for the remainder of my days. God, help me be found faithful until you take me home someday, whenever that is. And the Bible says if you say that and you mean it in your own words, the angels are singing your name right now. It's being inscribed in the Lamb's Book of Life. No matter how many years you live here, they'll be ready for you there. You ought to share that with somebody. You could start today by sharing it with us. We're not going to ask you to say anything, but we'll know how to pray for you if you'll come down and share it with us. You want to join this church? I would. If God is telling you to do that, you just come right on. Maybe you've been thinking about it. Maybe you need to rededicate yourself to service. You've needed to do some things, you just haven't done it. Maybe you need to come and pray for a lost friend or loved one. You know who they are? I think specific prayers bring specific answers. God, by the power of the Holy Spirit, move in our midst now. We offer this prayer in the name of the one who's building us a better place, Jesus Christ our Lord.